Welcome to Soft Cock Appreciation Week 2024. I invite you to get comfortable as you join us for what I like to call cockversations, discussions, or grown folk putting their heads together and sharing ideas in authentic and real ways. Now be aware we don't hold back in our language, and what follows is not for overly sensitive or easily kerfuffled ears. And before we dive in, remember, what is shared here is not meant to be, nor is it a replacement for medical advice. Whenever you notice changes in your body or that of a loved one, especially in how the penis is functioning, please seek out medical consultation. What the penis is saying could literally save a life. Thank you for supporting us. If you take away something useful from this, please let us know, write a review, spread the word, and keep coming back for more. Are you ready? Let's do it. Hello, hello. This is Erica Leroy, and welcome back to Soft Cock Appreciation Week 2024. I am so excited for today's recording, today's offering of Soft Cock Appreciation Week, to have with me Zach Budd. Now, Zach has been part of Soft Cock Week since its beginning. So Zach's history is even deeper in this than mine, and I'm excited to have him back. We're getting to know each other. So part of the ethos of Soft Cock Appreciation Week is to just demonstrate through what it is that we're doing, how people can get into deep conversation about sexual themes, personal themes, relational themes, health themes, because it's really not as hard as a lot of people make it out to be. So Zach and I hardly know each other, and yet we can kick it off. We can flow. There's going to be a bit of a freestyle together. And I'm just really grateful that in your busy life, you made the time to come back for year 3. You're like you're like an SN. You're almost going to get your SNL jacket, right?
Yeah, I'm
Your
a Soft Cock
SCW
Week
jacket.
veteran.
Yes,
Yeah,
you're
there
a
you
Soft
go.
Cock Week veteran. Exactly.
Love it.
So, Zach, let's kick it off with you telling people a little bit about yourself, how you would like people to know about you in relationship to the work you do in the world and your connection to Soft Cock Appreciation Week.
Yeah. So, my name is Zach Budd. LMSW are the credentials behind my name. That's sort of my academic professional stuff. Although for now, that should be changing here in the next couple of months. Knock on wood. I use he/him pronouns. I identify as definitely AMAB. I am cisgender. I'm a cisgender polyamorous. Let's go with bi/pansexual. Um, very much a kinky megasexual slut. I live here in what's now called Houston, Texas. It's actually land that originally belonged to peoples of the Atacapa, Akokisa, and Tarankawa communities. But this is where I make my home. It's basically what I consider my hometown. Also, very probably the most diverse city in America. That's actually been proven scientifically. The credentials LMSW mean I'm a licensed master social worker. I'm currently working towards credentialing as a licensed clinical social worker, which is sort of my terminal license as a clinical social worker. I work doing psychotherapy mostly for my community, which is going to include folks along the LGBTQ spectrum. Those who are also kinky, polyamorous, and whatnot make up a lot of my clientele. As you can imagine, working with folks who are LGBTQ here in the state of Texas is a bit of a challenge because I have a lot of trans clients, a lot of trans youth, and by definition, they live in a society that wants them to no longer exist. Ironically, that means I also have a lot of experience in working with trauma. I got involved, I think, with Soft Cock Week through Michelle, who of course is just amazing. But primarily because I'm also, before I became a therapist, was a consent educator and a sexuality educator. So I did a lot of work around consent, sexuality, particularly when it comes to, like I said, my experience with abuse and trauma and things like that. But also insofar as I have done a lot of work around all people who have been victimized with consent victimizations, also pointing out that consent violations happen way more often than we think of them. People think of things in the news. What's in the news today? Diddy clearly was probably a consent violator. I mean, it's possible some of those people weren't, but by the time they start charging you with sex trafficking, you have no concept of what consent is. I had been talking about consent for years, had been teaching about it for a while, and kind of came up with, my own sort of model for how I teach it, which was an invest model. But that led me into other forms of sexuality education, and that's how I got to meet wonderful people like Michelle, who kind of came up with the concept of Soft Cock Week, and just in talking about it and the realization. So one of the issues that I deal with as both a therapist who's dealt with a lot of people that have trauma and a sexuality educator who also has dealt with a lot of people that have trauma is a lot of it has to do with toxicity. And we can go back and forth. I know we talked about this a little bit, Erica, both either toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, or just toxicity in general, because if I know one thing about human behavior is that human beings have a tremendous capacity to be terrible to each other. And so a lot of that shows up in this understanding of, what penises or phalluses are supposed to do, look like, and be in our society. And anything short of that is inherently itself a problem, which is why this conversation about soft cocks and became such an issue or something that was so near and dear to my heart. And so when the idea came up and talking with Michelle about it, I was definitely on board. And yeah, as you say, this is not my first rodeo here with Soft Cock Appreciation Week. I will point out, and this is not to make anybody uncomfortable, but as I talked about dealing with trauma, one of the things I mentioned early on when I was a part of this initially is I myself have a challenging relationship with the word cock because of trauma myself. And so trying to find ways to talk about phalluses, penises, dicks, whatever we want to call them, in other ways. And I know we had one fun session where we were just kind of brainstorming, what else can we call them? And just other ways to talk about it. As an educator, I try to steer away from euphemisms because I see euphemisms as a way of people to avoid talking about things. But also when someone does have a trauma history with something, how do you have an entire Soft Cock Appreciation Week and not use the word cock?
Right. Well, I'm so glad. Let me just stop you
yeah.
because I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the first things I was going to ask you is, what is the word that you would like to use? Because, we do have this title, Soft Cock Appreciation Week. For me, I like to use the word cock because I grew up in an area with peacocks. And one of the things that I love about peacocks is the male peacock really has no issue taking up space, right? They're the ones with the giant feathers. And I feel like, when I'm working with male sexuality, especially in the time that we're in now, there's a lot of what I call cock confusion, or, around, can I be present? Should I be present? Am I allowed to have pride? Am I allowed to be here? Am I allowed to show up? Am I allowed to appreciate, what is out there in the sensory world? So for me, it works because I have this image of the energy, but I really respect that everybody has something different. And I also know, especially, a lot of my friends who are Black men, dick is the word, right?
Yeah.
So if dick is the word for the day, we can use dick.
Yeah.
If penis, whatever you tell me, I roll. One of the things about like the whole ethos of this is we roll with whatever it is that makes the body say, yeah, that feels good to me, right? Like
I
we don't
like
have to
that.
we
That's
don't have to
awesome.
push through, that this is Soft Cock Week and keep saying, if your body and
Yeah.
your, if it has a response for you, that's not your response. So for me, because dick for me has a little bit of that, like, you're a dickishness. So I've worked, I had a partner recently who was like, I really need you to say dick more. And I was like, well, I can, I'm an imagery person. So I was like, all right, then the way I'm going to make a connect, just like you were saying, you have to find that way to make an in with cock. So for me, the in with dick is, I think of a private detective. I'm like,
Nice.
ooh, this is sort of like I'm like I'm like the lady who comes to knocking on the door of the private dick and says, can you help me find it?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. I love that this is Soft Cock Appreciation Week, but the word of the day is going to be dick. Because that's just fascinating for me. And you're right. I mean, it in a lot of ways it is a cultural thing. I identify as a Black male and do in many ways associate with that community. Although I will say I don't speak for all Black folks, but by definition, we're not a monolith, but I can definitely speak to my experiences. And yeah, that was just not a word we use very much. For me, additionally, it's a trauma trigger. I have a trauma associated with the word cock. And so I mean, I've worked through it, done the work. It doesn't necessarily trigger me as much anymore, but overuse of it can definitely do so.
Yeah.
And yeah, you hear it a lot, and it's just not a thing. I've literally heard comedians say, we don't use the word cock. For us, cock is what you do before you fire a gun. Cock is a male chicken. There's a ball cock in my toilet, but that's not the way that works. So yeah, dick, penis, phallus, those work for me, but I like the word of the day being dick. So that's cool.
Okay, so how about for today? Welcome. So, hey everybody, welcome to Dangling Dick Appreciation Week.
Oh man, dangling dick.
I had to come
we
up
can
with
just
what
call
was gonna be
we can
the
just call it soft dicks. That's fine too. Soft dicks, not hard, unloaded. Yeah,
yeah,
unloaded,
yeah,
non-angry.
right.
Resting dick, as in like
Resting
resting dick energy.
resting
Yeah,
dick face.
yeah, resting dick face. There you go. Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
ironic. My father's name is Richard, and he would never, ever, ever allow anyone. Nobody ever called him Dick.
Yeah.
Richard, Rick. When he was young, people used to call him Richie, but he would or Ricky, but he never let anybody call him Dick.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, in his entire lifetime, I never remember anybody doing it. Certainly not doing it and getting away with it. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
But
it's
so
interesting, the naming.
I also happen to know with I know if in media, like in television and stuff like that, around censors, you can call someone a dick, as in don't be a dick, but you cannot refer to a dick as a body part. That it's funny how that's the line of censorship. So you can be a dick, or your name can be Dick, but the minute you start talking about someone's dick, that gets censored. It's fascinating that it works that way. So yeah,
Wow, that is, I mean,
yeah,
that's a whole topic in and of itself,
right,
right? The
yeah,
phallus in media, and like,
mm-hmm.
and what it is, that how we learn about it in the first place, right? All of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I want to circle back to well, you brought up the toxic masculinity piece, and maybe we'll
Mm-hmm.
just start there because, let me just share for our listeners today that, when I listened to the panel that you were on in year one, and you brought up a couple things about, toxic masculinity then. And it's really just sat with me as one of the things I love about what we're doing with Dangling Dick Appreciation Week is that all of our recordings are available year round all the time. You can go back and look at 2022, 2023, 2024 will be up, forever. And hear more, catch more. So I listened to the panel you were on, and it's just really been sitting with me because you have
Mm-hmm.
really good points, good strong feelings. I have really strong feelings about what I call toxic femininity, which
Mm-hmm.
I think we don't talk about that much, and how I've seen that really play into erectile health, erectile function, overall men's
Mm-hmm.
mental health. And so I'm excited for us to dig into this a little bit because, I think the wording I gave to you was, let's talk about, toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, and then just genderless toxicity, right? Like, what are the
Yeah,
elements that it's just
yeah.
toxicity is toxicity. And what does that do to the health and well-being overall, that we can say both, from our own personal journeys and also from, all of the people that you serve, the people that I serve. I think that's a really something that we just don't talk about, and that definitely has impact.
Yeah, yeah. I'm dying to know to hear your thoughts about toxic femininity, but we can get to that here in a second. Yeah, toxic masculinity. Obviously, I experienced just as a youth, back when I was but a pup, growing up, because I was always the quiet, sensitive kid. And when you grow up in a house with brothers and a dad in the military, yeah, it becomes a thing. Not to mention, in the Black community in general tends to be very toxically masculine. If you look specifically at very coherent, either African sort of diasporic um, communities, for example, the Jamaican, Caribbean, things like that, there tends to be a lot of toxic masculinity in there, and it all kind of looks the same. It tends to be very, very hyper masculine. It has a tendency to be extremely homophobic, and by extension transphobic. Um, but it also tends to just sort of um, put the sort of onus on being this archetypal
Mm.
male dominant, very, very harsh, unfeeling person. There tends to be a powerful lack of compassion, And anything that is perceived as compassion is considered to be not toxic. And I'm not gonna repeat some of the names that kind of come out of that. But what I've found is that it also tends to turn people in a lot of ways into just abusive monsters. And the concept of what we're talking about here, where we are dealing with, penises that are not erect and ready to go in full force and work like a charm and whatnot, it becomes so attached. That itself, toxic masculinity kind of means if your dick doesn't work, then there's something wrong with you. But there's something wrong with your manhood in that sense. And the minute we start questioning your manhood, we can question everything else about you. You're inherently weak. Somehow it's gotten associated with intelligence, but intelligence sometimes can be perceived, if you're too smart or bookwormish or nerdy, as I was as a kid, inherently you're not masculine enough, you're not rough and tumble enough, that type of thing. And I find that it harms other people in so many other ways. Toxic masculinity is itself harmful, definitely to men. Because there's this sense that there is inherently something wrong with me, particularly when we're talking about just penises and phalluses and dicks themselves. I remember being a young kid, and again, I was the kind of shy, quiet one that did a lot of reading and stuff. Now, one of the things I did have going for me that fit this sort of toxically masculine trope is I played sports, particularly I played football. But again, I didn't do a lot of talking. I just played football, did my thing, and I just kind of quietly went home. If you ever hang out in a locker room, as much as people talk about locker room talk, it is a horribly toxic place. At least it was when I was growing up as a kid. I can't imagine much has changed, though I can be hopeful. And you would hear some of these tropes coming out of there that was so toxically masculine. In my mind, as I heard them, because again, I did a lot of observing as a kid, even though not a lot of talking, I was convinced there was something inherently wrong with me because I did not, as some of my classmates at the age of 12 or 13 purported to have a 13-inch penis. Somehow there was something wrong with me. There had to be, right? Therefore, now I started questioning my own manhood, and I was 12. It was ridiculous and insane. Now that prompted me to do other things because I was a book nerd, but there's this sense that I already don't measure up because I don't measure up to what is essentially the lies everyone else was telling. Because back then nobody was looking for proof. It was just how loudly can you lie about something and everyone just really accept it. On top of, the work that I do now, where I deal with a lot of people who have faced one sort of trauma or another, whether it be in relationships, heaven forbid, content warning, domestic violence situations and stuff. A lot of that stems from toxic masculinity. This idea that if you are a man, you are in control. You have all power at all times over everyone in your household. The ironic thing is now I am working with clients who grew up in environments like that and are dealing with their own relationships to masculinity and toxic masculinity, on top of dealing with people who identify anywhere on the queer spectrum, who are themselves, trans and whatnot, and whether they be trans masculine or trans femme or even trans non-binary, are having to figure out how much of the toxicity they grew up with from parents who had toxically masculine or potentially toxically feminine or just toxic ideas about gender and where those things show up, how much of them and their treatment of their children leads to this today, let alone do we run down the path of trying to explain this stuff away. Like, oh, you're trans because your dad was a misogynistic piece of shit. Yes and maybe no. But at the same time, it may have informed the way people think about certain things. It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody goes through the process of transitioning and, reaffirming their gender through the steps that it takes to do that just because somebody was horrible to them. There's a lot of things that don't happen because people were terrible. Right. So toxicity has an effect like anything else. It's a part of the environment people grow up in. I don't think it's inherently genetic. I think people can just not be toxic. I sometimes think they don't know another option. And so that becomes difficult to do. But anyway,
no,
I'm dying to know what you say.
Yes.
What is how you define toxic femininity?
Well, first, let me say, one of the things I really appreciate, I appreciate everything that you just brought up. And I also really appreciate, I think what happens in society right now, the way that toxic masculinity generally is talked about, is it's talked about in relationship from like that sort of inherent in men. And it's something that comes from, generally, we could say mostly cis het men, right? It's sort of defined more in that, from men to others, right? That it's to women, to, trans, to queer. But But
And two
really
other men. Yeah.
well, that's what I'm really appreciating about what you bring up, because I think a lot of people don't talk about how it affects how the cultural element of toxic masculinity that we're all kind of living under, how it does affect men, and that the way that, we don't name it that way. Like for women, right? Like as a woman, because it's even named as something that could be impacting me, that gives me tools and language. There's information out there for me to be like, oh, maybe that's what I'm feeling in my body. Maybe that's what's happening around me. I can other this. I can move away from it because I have knowledge. But that, I think, for a lot of men, oh, okay. There we go. Sorry, we have my internet. But for a lot of men, because we don't bring that up, then it's bouncing. I like to say, in the olden days, in the very olden days, right?
Mm-hmm.
A man would leave the home with leathers and, chain mail and all sorts of ways to protect themselves from the arrows and the barbs and the things that were coming at you as you went about your day. But in our day, you have a t-shirt and then your body. And for me as a body
Mm-hmm.
worker, as for someone who's really working from the body out, what I see so much in men is that it's like all the armoring actually ends up being in the physical body. And then, we have higher incidence of heart disease, higher incidence of diabetes, higher incidence of, mental health issues. I mean, so many things, because we're not really externally protected. We have to armor, that men really are being asked to sort of armor up to this
Mm-hmm.
toxicity in the world. So I just really appreciate, naming that's real.
Yeah.
In terms of toxic femininity, so before I got into the work I do now as a sexological body worker and, intimacy person, whatever we're going to call me today,
Why not all of the above?
what
Yeah.
all of it is, right? I was in education for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
I was in environments, I was in private schools and public schools, from all the way from early childhood. I started working with parenting programs all the way through high school, college
Oh
years.
wow. Okay.
And so for a long chunk of life, I was in academic institutions, school institutions, in which it's predominantly led by women.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I really saw, and then when I left education, but I still had my sons growing up in it and really looking from the outside, like, most boys who become men or become anything else, but boyhood is really predominantly being surrounded by a female led, very dysfunctional system that is our American education system.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a lot of, you're a failure, you're misbehaved, you have a problem. Boys are generally labeled earlier in their lives as having some kind of emotional, disorder, ADD. My father, back in the 80s, he was a pediatric neurologist, and he was at the forefront because he was the only pediatric neurologist in Southern California who took Medi-Cal. And it was the beginning of the crack baby years. So his practice was it was like 90% African American children in like Long Beach, Compton, like that area.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I remember he said to me, I mean, he came, so again, this is probably like late 70s, early 80s. And he said, I have these moms, they're single moms, they're working 3 jobs, and they're bringing their 7-year-old boy to the clinic saying, the school won't let my child be at school unless he's on Ritalin.
Mm.
And my dad said to me, he's like, these boys don't need Ritalin. What they need is more recess and a garden, right? They need to move. Like that's the natural. But we put young children, and especially young boys, into a situation that, is not conducive to the natural development of how children and young adults and, middle schoolers, how they really need to be. And then we
Yeah.
blame them, right? And say something is wrong. And that so that's one element for me of the toxic femininity that I really like to name, is just that a lot of boys, by the time they get to young adulthood, manhood, they're really impacted by the quality of care that has surrounded them through their educational journey. And there's a lot, and the reality, especially in the Black and Hispanic community, is that the dropout rate is much higher for boys than it is for girls.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're seeing,
Yeah.
that school to prison pipeline. We have to look at, if we're looking at the school to prison pipeline, you have to look at, well, who's running schools? And the majority, while it's not exclusively female, it is definitely one of the few places, one of the few institutions, at least in our North American culture, where it is predominantly designed and run by women.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like my field, social work. It started
Right.
by white women, with the blessing of the patriarchy. And it started off with some horrible patriarchal views and has done some actual damage, and now still is in a lot of ways, and there's still a lot of that to push back against. But it's there needs to be the realization that there is some toxicity there, and it needs to be kind of battled against. So yeah, no, that's an interesting take
Exactly.
on that. And yeah, you're right. There is a lot of toxicity in education that comes from women, and like I said, also in social work, same thing. So,
Right. So, and then I also see, just that was sort of a more global general, but then, in the work that I do, where I'm working with men, where we're trying to get to an understanding of what's happening with the body, because the thing about erectile health is, it's like, I mean, this is where like I put on my private dick outfit. Right. I mean, I think the reason,
I'm sorry. You have to get a costume now that's just your private dick outfit,
I know, I really,
and
if
you should
anybody
probably
is
wear
out
it
there,
during soft
if
coffee.
if anybody is out there who loves to do like graphic design, illustration, to like, if someone wants to draw me the private dick, I would be very, very grateful. I would be very
Oh my
grateful
gosh, it's
indeed.
perfect.
But it's a lot of, for me, a lot of the work about hanging out with men and helping with erectile function is it's sleuth work, because
Mhm.
is it blood, is it diabetes, is it prostate, is it stress, which can be so many different things, right? Like the stress of where's my money situation is different than the stress of like a custody battle, which is different from the stress of I just, lost somebody that I care about has passed, or the stress of, I mean, so every stress is a little bit different too. So lumping it all in is a little tricky. But that um the sorry, I just got a little pop-up that I don't know why. But that as we take apart, really I generally go from, let's start at the physical. Like, have you had things checked out? Like, let's not, this again, like when I was an educator and we were looking at kids' behavior in the classroom, I would always say, let's not do behavior mod until we know that there isn't a physical impairment, because that's just going to lead to frustration. And it's the same thing when we're working with erectile health, right? Like, let's rule out the things that might be physiological and see what happens. And then if all the if you get some tests, if you do things and there isn't something, then we can start sleuthing through what's happening in your relationship, right? I had a number of clients for a while where, their dick wasn't showing up. And then they described to me the environment that their female partner was creating. And
Oh yeah,
and I had to just
yeah,
say, if I was your dick, I wouldn't show up for that party either. Right.
right,
Right.
yeah,
Like, it's not
yeah.
a warm, welcoming environment, that part of, and I think part of the, if we're going to call it the toxic femininity, is that there's just such a lack of education and awareness about how men work, right? How men's mental health works, how men's physical health work.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
lack of information then puts the onus on men, and I think especially Black men, to
Mm.
show up as I'm the one who's supposed to guide this sexual interaction. I'm supposed to be in charge. I'm supposed to be the dom. I'm supposed to, and just that, like, I'm supposed to, I'm supposed to, I'm supposed to. And so, kind of what you were
Mhm.
saying about the locker room, like, and if I'm not, then, something's wrong with me.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, and what's fascinating is, and I love that you mentioned that, like towards the end there, it kind of ties into what I was talking about with the hypersexuality. There's this sense of, and I'm just going to call it out, it's an inherent sort of blindness and racism that leads to toxicity. So, for example, you know, um, in the Black community, with Black men in particular, but definitely all Black people, our sexuality has been hypersexualized by other people externally.
Mm-hmm.
We are not necessarily hypersexual people, though. Yes, I do identify as a megasexual slut. That's me personally. But Black people in general have always been hypersexualized for a couple of reasons. Our sexuality had to be controlled. It had to
Mm-hmm.
be because Black women were inherently out of control, but you had to control their sexuality because their children literally were direct inputs into what was then called the American economy. You
Mm-hmm.
know, more importantly, with Black men, their sexuality had to be controlled because you literally studied them out. But suddenly, when they are no longer just plugged in, as free labor, and now they are people that have their own ideas, you have to kind of control them. We
Mm-hmm.
know for a fact that policing in the society was created by definition to control the movement of Black bodies. So Black sexuality had to be controlled. It never belonged to us. That's one of the things I always point out whenever I talk about things. And I do um, a workshop called Super Minority, where I'm talking about polyamorous Black men,
Mm-hmm.
and the realization that for Black men, our sexuality has never belonged to us, and it still does in a lot of ways. Like, I may have mine and own mine, but if you think about it, people see me showing up at any sort of event or a party, and they already have assumptions as to what it means. I
Yeah.
tell you I'm polyamorous and I have multiple partners as a Black man, and their assumption is I have a harem of at least 30 women, and I'm just reeling every last one of them every night. Because again, I have to have a 13-inch penis because that's what people expect when they think
Right.
of a Black man, right? More
Mm-hmm.
importantly, I have interacted with people all across the non-monogamous spectrum, swingers parties and stuff like that, who've been flat out disappointed because how come you're not like what they perceive to be the typical hypersexual, dangerous? And let's be honest, when I'm talking about this, there's usually a particular picture people have in mind, and I'll just call it out. What I refer to as colonizers or white people
Mm-hmm.
tend to have in mind when they're thinking about Black male sexuality. This is somebody that's dark skinned, highly muscular, large, dreadlocked, and has a 13-inch penis, and is also ravenous,
Mm. Yeah.
sexually.
Right.
I may be ravenous sexually. I don't have dark skin, I don't have dreadlocks, and I don't have a 13-inch penis. That being said, I do fine. But there's also the sense that if you are not that, then somehow there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's one end of it, generally. I can also speak from personal experience as somebody who was in a long-term relationship with somebody that itself was abusive, who felt that they had to control my sexuality
Mm-hmm.
for a couple reasons. One, this is just somebody that themselves had a bunch of mental health issues, and a big one was control, and they also had powerful trust issues. So any attempt for me to find any sort of interest in anything, and that included looking at a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, had to be controlled. You are not allowed to have any sort of sexual anything
Mm.
that doesn't include me, whether I'm there or not, which meant it had to be controlled. But I figured out that controlling sexuality was a way of controlling me because I just happened to have one of those relationships, and it happens all the time, where there's a discrepancy in sex drive. Well, if mine is higher than yours, the response was, well, then you need to get yours under control. And if you can't, I will for you, which led to ridiculous amounts of abuse, to the point where, I'm dealing with things that have nothing to do with me, but now I have to deal with them. And
Mm-hmm.
now, fortunately for me, that relationship broke down and eventually ended. It took way too long for it to do that. But those are also forms of what I would see as toxic femininity. This
Absolutely.
sense that, wait a minute, I'm this, attractive little white lady. What do you mean you don't want to, grab me by my hair, throw me across the room, ravage me while my husband watches for our entertainment? You're not a person at that point.
Yeah.
You are an idealized, basically ravenous animal, which is what we need you to be and nothing else. We have ways of dressing it up. I've got my own opinions about some of them. But I've also had people get mad at me for pointing out that it's like, listen, you all don't realize this is all connected. You can act like it's
Mm-hmm.
just something we like, it's just a fetish. It really kind of isn't, though. Like, if you look at me and you're disappointed because I don't fit your narrative, what you're telling me is that you don't care about me as a human being. You just want me to fit your fantasy. And if I
Right.
don't, then I have no more of a use for you, which is fine. But you can't do that. And then in the next breath, tell me that somebody that does fit your fantasy, you somehow care about them as a human being. That's bullshit. It isn't how that works. You found somebody to sort of fit into your narrative, and great, Yahtzee, we got what we want. Now we can do things like call him a bull and tell him how wonderful he is. He is basically a old-fashioned stud, as if this were still slave times, that you don't have a whole lot of concern for. Now, I would love to be proven wrong. I don't see it though. More importantly, I don't know if people understand the underlying stuff of that. I don't have a problem with people having desires and fantasies. That's fine. But we're dealing with human beings here. And again, Black people are a monolith. Every Black man you come across is not trying to rail your wife. And as much as people don't like it when I say this, if you go onto Pornhub right now and look up interracial, there's a reason why it's so freaking popular. You know, it's money.
Yes.
It's all about money. Who mostly has the money in the society? For the most part, cis white men. This is all about toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, and it also has undertones as far as social structures and race, and quite frankly, fantasies, and let's be honest, fetishes. You know, and human beings aren't supposed to be fetishized like that. Attractiveness, I don't have a problem with. Fetishes are different.
Come back.
You know, fetishes, when they inherently dehumanize a person, are problematic, and I'm not going to ever shy away from having that conversation. If it hurts people's feelings, fine, but realize if you're fetishizing a person as this ravenous sexual being and he fits every other narrative but happens to show up for whatever reason and his penis doesn't work, is he inherently less valuable to you because now this big muscular, dreadlock, thick accent Jamaican dude or whatever that you want to pounce on your wife for your own entertainment, suddenly his dick doesn't work. Well, then what the hell is he here for? What do we have you here for? Now we've got to do all these things to make him work. Okay, now he's no longer a human being. He is a thing that isn't operating the way you want him to.
Right.
So it becomes an issue.
No, I mean, I think all of that is just so, dead on. I think, because of my own experience of, being married and partnered with Black men, Caribbean men, and as well as African-American Black men, I really, the way that I, see things show up in porn, and not only in porn, but then also this piece of like the men that I work with or that I'm friends with or I'm partnered with, where like they have just fine average size penises, right? Like, but there's such a, like, it's almost like that creates that the way that the trope is out there and the stereotype is out there, it actually makes men who, like yourself, who are, rounder, maybe softer, have a different kind of sexuality, it kind of makes you invisible too. It's like you're either highly visible or like, I don't, because the only way that I interact with, for a lot of people, the only way that I have an interaction with Black male sexuality is through what I see in porn. That if that isn't you, then I don't even see you because that's not represented. And it's interesting, like part of what we're doing with Dangling Dick Appreciation Week, right, this year, is we are having an erotica open mic as the closeout of the week, because what came up last year was, again, lack of representation, right? Lack of representation in porn, even in written erotica, audio erotica. It's very rare that you have media in which the delight of not having penetrative sex, the delight of having a penis show up that's softer or maybe has an ebb and flow, that just isn't represented. And we need to, be creating more opportunity to take things out of the invisibility cloak and bring them forward. And, that's so much a part of what we're trying to do. I also want to circle back to something that you said that just really touched me when you were talking about your relationship, because, I also identify as, poly swinger, kinky, what did you say? Mega slut?
So that's from Dr. Liz Powell's book, Building Open Relationships, where she identifies as a megasexual. So there's demisexuals and there's megasexuals.
Okay,
so
well,
megasexual
wonderful. But one of the things I think that comes up, I think one of the things I enjoy about being in the open poly community is that for the most part, people are doing the work around jealousy and anxiety, right? And part of this conversation about toxicity and what you described comes back to the description that you shared. And so I want to kind of put a marker on that for people who are watching and listening, because the this element, if we don't do the work, so anxiety and jealousy, by their very nature, are adrenaline and cortisol um, ecosphere in the
Mm-hmm.
person who has it. And when we're running, the thing about our hormones, our primary hormones, is that they're palpable to other people, right? In both the positive and negative. If I'm running a lot of oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, if you see me smiling, if we're laughing together, if we're creating space where even though, we're still new friends, we're able to find a flow that feels safe and comfortable and enjoyable because
Yeah.
we're choosing to run with each other on sort of that good vibe energy, that positive vibration. But when you're running on, the vibration, the actual, human frequency that is jealousy, anxiety, possessiveness, fear, then then you experience it. You experience it not only in your body, but like that whole element, that whole phrase of like, I go home and I'm walking on eggshells, or I can't,
Mm-hmm.
here's my partner, but I can't say this because it's going to make them do this, and that even if you are a positive person, over time, being in an environment with somebody, whether they're male, female, or anything, gender fluid, that the the energy of those types of thoughts and emotions have direct impact, and that direct impact can show up then to look like low libido, erectile dysfunction, the changes in prostate health,
Mm-hmm.
inability to have an orgasm or have an ejaculation, all of those things. When people are like, well, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Looking
Yeah.
at our relationships, and also the relationship, some of us have a toxic relationship with ourselves, right? Our negative
Mm-hmm.
self-talk, that
Yeah.
can be that
Absolutely.
as well, right? And I would
Yeah.
imagine in the work that you do as a social worker, right, that some of what you're helping people learn how to do is get past the negative self-talk that can
Oh, all the
really
time.
do
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah. I've always been in my work, both as a sexuality educator, but also as a social worker and a therapist. I'm a big fan of self care, and a big part of self care is the way you talk to yourself, because I treat it like having a relationship with you. And yeah, there is a lot of toxicity in the way people talk to themselves. In most cases, it's learned, but that kind of becomes a problem. So yeah, I deal with that a lot. Um,
A toxicity that one can have in their own mind, right? That, because I see
mhm.
that too, especially with men, where it becomes like performance anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Anxiety is anxiety, right? So if you have performance
Hmm.
anxiety, if you're like, sort of sending negative messages to yourself, if you have a negative self-talk to your penis, like a lot of the work that I do, Zach, is really like, I think of like we can repair some attachment issues by the
Hmm.
way that we masturbate, the way we have a relationship, that the penis is very much like the young
Yeah.
pre-verbal part of ourselves. And if we parent it the way that maybe we wish we had been parented, if our
Hmm.
energy is, well, why aren't you showing up? Or na 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 na. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
like, I haven't
Yeah.
been taking care of you. I haven't been listening to you. I haven't been, but then I have all this expectation about how you're going to behave and
Hmm.
perform. How much of that is like that? There's, even if you can't repair something that was something that, is deeply wired in from, very, very young stuff in a family system or a caregiving
Hmm.
system, there's this way in our masturbation practice that we can actually, look at and notice how we're talking to ourselves and our own body, and
Hmm.
encourage the penis in a way that is loving and caring and soothing, and
Right.
because it's about growth, right? And what we know from
Yeah.
working with young people is that there's a kind of energy, the opposite of toxicity, right? We've been talking about toxicity. The opposite of toxicity is growth mindset, right? Growth
Hmm.
energy, the ability to say, I always like to say, when people ask me, what is like, what is healthy attachment, right? Because I did a lot of, in my work in education, I did a lot of attachment stuff way before where we're at with it now in pop culture,
Growth attachment theory.
right?
Yeah.
And I just, what I always come down to, right, is it's like, the human being wants to be seen, to be heard, and to be accepted for where we are today, with room to grow into who we have yet to become. Right. And if we're around people and we're around energy that makes us feel seen, makes us feel heard, and makes us feel like there isn't a fixed I'm done, right? That I'm still growing, that there's still more to learn, that there's still ways that in every relationship, there's opportunity to, oh, there's another part of myself that, needs to adjust or has a new way of thinking or new way of learning. And that the relationship that men have with their penis, right, is also about growth energy.
Yeah.
If we're constantly disappointed, constantly frustrated, feeling like I'm not big enough, I'm not thick enough, I'm not this enough, I can't sustain enough, then that's a negative toxicity mindset that, doesn't really, just like the child who becomes avoidant, right? Or anxious, the penis can become anxious or
Yeah.
avoidant.
Yeah. And you can fixate on it too. I mean, it's for me, it's ironic, like in popular social media and whatnot, there's a fixation from people who identify as men on penises, on their dicks. If you lead with the dick pic, there's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
because if you are very, very clearly pointing out that you have a whole lot of toxicity around your penis, because you think that's basically all that you have to offer. I mean, what else do you have besides that? And it's ironic that you see that in so many places. But I mean, that's one of the things. And you're right. This idea of trying to have a healthier internal conversation with yourself, with your body, just in general, because who does that? Let alone all body parts, let alone talking to your genitals. Was it Carol Queen? I think there was somebody that I was reading about that was actually encouraging people who identify as women who have vulvas. Look at them, talk to them, tell them they're
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
It's kind of weird for men to do that. At least that's the kind of popular parlance, because part of toxicity, particularly when it comes to toxic masculinity, is an absolute cutoff from anything that remotely appears to be compassionate. I don't need that. I'm tough and it works all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. And if there is something wrong with it, you're not going to gently encourage it to be okay again. You just move through the world um, with this sort of hyper masculine, either are or you aren't, sort of hard nose about yourself, which isn't helpful, and causes more problems than it solves.
Let's switch gears a little bit. You open to talking a little bit about, so you as yourself, you're pretty good with your erectile function, right? You feel pretty
Yeah, yeah,
solid with that.
I am.
Right.
Mhm,
But you shared with me you do have diabetes. Yes.
mhm,
And
mhm.
that
Yep.
medication can also be part of, you know,
Mhm,
just what erectile flow function can mean anything from the hardness to the ejaculation to the orgasm, to all of
mhm.
those things. So, um, would
Yeah.
would you talk a little bit about what your personal journey has been as your body has changed? Because part of what we're talking about overall this week is body acceptance, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you get from this is what I used to be to this is what I am
Mhm.
now?
Yeah. So I self-identify as a fat boy and have been my whole life. And so consequently, um, there's been a lot of challenges as far as it's been a complicated relationship with my own body. I've gotten there to where I'm just better now with myself. I know I actually had to go to college and my undergraduate degrees in exercise science and health, fitness and human performance. So I know what healthy
Mm.
means and what, as opposed to what it looks like to some people. I know inherently, not only do I know that BMI as an index is bullshit, I know why. You know, so yeah, there's that. Also, I have the benefit of getting older. I'm actually 3 months to the day from my 49th birthday.
Oh, yeah.
As we record this. So yeah, getting older, body's getting a little slower, doesn't recover from things as much as it used to anymore. And yeah, I have taken medications in the past. Not so much for my diabetes medications, but those things you do have to watch circulation and flow and make sure everything is working and stuff like that. But I also had an experience that I think I shared with you, Erica, in our first conversation, and I might have talked about this on one of these previous Soft Talk weeks, where I was taking medication for mental health issues, for specifically depression and things. And one of the side effects was, an inability to orgasm. Everything else was working fine. Blood flow was fine. I was getting erect. Had no problem with desire. That's never been an issue for me. I just literally everything could get going, just could not finish. Could not get over the edge there. And you would not think that would be a problem. Initially, my first concern was, I wonder why this is, and there was a time when I had decided before I ever got on actual medication, as I mentioned, I am polyamorous. I have a number of partners, and I told myself I was never going to not tell them what was going on in my journey. So I started contacting them and saying, hey, love, I just want to let you know this thing has been going on, and they knew that had gone to see a psychiatrist, that I'd gotten diagnosed with certain things, started medications. They all knew this. And I went to them individually and said, I just want to let you know this has been going on. The responses were all positive, different types of positivity though. And one of them was like, hey babe, thanks for letting me know. I was never worried about you and whatnot. One of them was like, speaking of soft cock, she said, babe, there's so many other things we can do besides penetrative sex. I don't need you to be hard in order for us to have a good time. And she was not wrong. There was one that kind of laughingly said, she's like, okay, let me see if I understand this correctly. She's like, so you still have the desire? Yeah. She goes, so you're still the same horny motherfucker I've always done. I was like, absolutely. She's like, still get hard? I was like, literally daily. She's like, so everything else is fine. You just take longer to finish. I was like, yep. She says, love, I don't see a problem. I do not see the issue here. I was like, okay, I just wanted to let you know so that if something changes, she's like, okay, fine. One of them, this was something that was interesting. One of them said to me, babe, thanks for letting me know. I really appreciate it. I was like, I'll always be transparent. She's like, no, I'm glad you told me, because had you not, I would have assumed the problem was me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one caught me off guard because I was like, I'm the one that can't finish, but she would assume it was her problem. Speaking of toxicity,
right?
Wow, right?
Yeah, that's a big one.
This
on
idea
women.
that he didn't get off, it must be my fault. I'm like, really, babe? It's all because of And by the way, I've already talked to my psychiatrist about it. There's a good chance this will go away. It's just temporary. It actually turned out to be temporary. It lasted about 3 or 4 months, which again, depending on who you ask, was a good 3 or 4 months. In some cases, it was amazing. In other cases, I realized my stamina needed to be upgraded because damn. But the realization that had I not been forthcoming about it and been willing to say, hey, and it wasn't even necessarily it was a bad thing. It was just a side effect that was a sexual side effect. We classify those in the mental health industry as a sexual side effect. It wasn't a bad one, but she would have took it as somehow there was something wrong with her, which of course is the last thing I would have wanted. But it also made me think, how many times do people have physical reactions that show up, to whatever it is, whether it be a trauma, an experience, even a medication, or just a medical diagnosis that shows up in one or another sexually, and assume it's inherently a problem on their part?
Yeah.
We know, you and I know, because we're educators, there's so many things that can affect you sexually. So many things. I told my partners I was going on a journey to improve my mental health. They were all on board. Part of that was starting a medication. I started one. I had an allergic reaction to it, so I had to switch to another one, and this was the side effect. And so I had to determine, do I want to switch again or see if this goes away? And if I was going to wait, I had to let my partners know. I did, and it never occurred to me that one of them, had I not let her know, hey, this is me, would have assumed that there was something wrong with her. Babe, there's nothing wrong with you. Hell, there's nothing wrong with me. In fact, if anything, we know that the only problem I have is that now I have to be more committed to finishing the job. If finishing the job is even a goal here, that's the other thing. Goal-oriented sex, is that necessarily an issue? And a couple of them said, babe, you don't, she's like, will you get mad at me if you don't finish? I was like, never. But that's not who I am. Quite frankly, I'm always grateful just to be able to have sex, let alone, so But being able to have a conversation and to get over myself, that was a big ego thing, which, by the way, toxic masculinity is all about ego. How there's somehow something wrong with me. I can't imagine my partner thinking it was somehow her issue. But I also know, because I've worked with people before who have had that experience, that abuse, that, if for whatever reason, either you don't finish or I don't finish, somehow it's you, somehow it's got to be your fault, as opposed to, no, there's just something going on.
Yeah.
So thus far, knock on wood, I haven't struggled with impotence or anything. It's funny. I've had a number of people ask me about, have I considered, medication for erectile dysfunction? Sure. I mean, I'll look into it. I also have hypertension, so it's something I'd have to talk to a doctor about. What I find fascinating about that is that they literally use sex to sell it.
Right.
Right. Which is, I mean, I can't, watch anything now. I can't watch a freaking football game without a Blue Chew, commercial. And it's usually some very attractive redhead with gorgeous eyes, just happens to be laying on a bed with her bare feet showing, encouraging her boyfriend. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Which is fascinating, because what better way to get already insecure men to sign up for something, and it's like, dude, again, I'm not non-monogamous. I got no problem saying, hey, if I need help, I need help. I mean, by definition, I'm outnumbered. I love every last one of them, but I got work to do. And if that's going to, I will get over myself in a heartbeat. That isn't the issue. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating that that's the thing.
Well, I want to dig into a couple of things that you said, because you brought, thank you for sharing your story, and you brought up some really beautiful examples of some things that part of the struggle. So if you were, what you were talking about, not only did you have to tell one partner, but you had to tell multiple partners. Now, a lot of men who are struggling with sexual function, they don't even know how to start the conversation. That just starting the conversation of, hey, this is what's going on with me, that is a very vulnerable place. That's kind of, again, going back to, if we're going to call it toxic masculinity, cultural, hierarchy, capitalism, patriarchy, colonization, all of those things, that to just get through the door. I mean, that's the whole thing about what we're doing with this movement, is how do we just start getting through the door, Zach, of making it just like talking about, where do you want to go for dinner, when we're talking about, penises and erectile health. So what is the advice, if there was somebody listening right now, which we hope there are, that there are men who realize, maybe the way for me to get over the part that is either holding back from sexuality because I don't know, right? Like, in my personal experience, my partner who passed away from diabetes, his way of working around it was that he was just really oral, until I said, a couple months into our relationship, can you just let me know a little bit about what's going on? Right. Because again, like you, I was in a polyamorous, relationships. And I was like, I like penetrative sex. So if it's not something that's on the table for us, I'm okay with it. But I just want to, I want to know that that's what it is. So then I have an understanding of the expectation, and I'm not wondering quietly. Because when we're wondering quietly, is something wrong with me? Is he not happy? Is this a da da da? Like we were talking about jealousy and anxiety, then there's an energy in the room, right? Confusion and frustration are also energies that can impact arousal and sexuality. So how would you encourage, someone who is having whatever, whether it's, delayed ejaculation, rapid ejaculation, erectile flow and function issues? How would you encourage, if you were talking with your friends, if you actually had a man who said to you, hey, Zach, I'm really struggling with my penis. What would you, how would you get him to talk to his partner?
Well, one, especially if it was somebody I knew that came to me like that, let's say it was just somebody I knew personally and they didn't come to me in a professional aspect of that. Sorry, my dog hates it when anybody knocks on the door. So, hey, we're good. We're good. She's just protecting. Anyway, not done yet? Hey, come here. Yes, you're a good girl. Come here.
Good girl.
All right. Yeah, no. If that were to be the case, if somebody were to come say that to me, number one, I'd ask, why are you talking to me instead of your partner? But okay, fine. If you come to me because you know I'm a therapist, you know I have experience with these things, you know that I can talk about such items, I would say, okay, um, how important is it to you to show up for you? Like, what is the meaning of it to you? You know, like for me, like right now, we're all getting older. I mean, I can no longer hide the gray in my hair, although I never really tried. But I have to admit, you know, physically, it's expected of us to have issues with our bodies. But dude, it's okay, especially now. It's got to be okay. More importantly, if you think about it, you know, talking to your partner about the challenges you're having physically that may affect the both of you and your physical relationship, what better way to connect? Like, it's one of the things that I learned early on is when you show that you are willing to have that conversation with your partner, believe it or not, it's kind of a turn on.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
wow, you are invested in my pleasure so much that you're
Yeah.
letting me know. You know, we can have the conversation about other options. You know, like you said, you had a partner who was very, very oral, but you kind of noticed he was only oral, which is great. But it's like it's again, that's totally the opposite from toxic masculinity, which is again with toxic masculinity, as we've been talking about, men lead with a dick pic. It's all about the size of the dick. That's all that ever matters. When you are with them sexually, you have to acknowledge it as the biggest dick they've ever had. Otherwise, you inherently hate them. Like it's all about that. When that doesn't work, congratulations, you have created yourself to be a one-trick pony. Now what do you do? You know, can you have a conversation about other things? Can you talk about other things? I was fortunate. I was honest with my partners and they said, "Babe, that's okay. We got other options. You know, you are good at other things." Why? Because I wanted to be, because of, like I said, the way I grew up. So, you know, find out what his value is to you, but also ask yourself, how invested are you in this relationship? Let her know, listen, you know, I'm sorry, this thing that's going on. You know, when I spoke to my partners about the issue that I was having, I was concerned that they would be disappointed, you know. And ironically, none of them were. They were, in fact, grateful that I said so and whatnot. And it turned into, in many cases, just a really cool conversation of vulnerability. But it also became very hot because that's how you connect, particularly in a relationship where you have a physical component to it. Wow, you're able to be vulnerable and share this thing. Great. What else can we do together? How else can we spend our time together? You know, what other things can we do sexually that isn't just penetrative? And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, when you figure out that your sex life with your partner is so much more than just PIV, suddenly the world opens up and there are so many other options, so many other things that you can do. But you have to be willing to start by having the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so you got to be willing to explore that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
And
that.
start
I
with your
love
own
that. And
feelings.
I
That's the other
also,
thing. Start with how it feels for you.
right. Right. Well, and that kind of leads to what you're saying brings up for me and the way that you talked about, you know, connecting with your partner, being open with your partner, just putting it out on the table and giving them the space to like respond authentically, which you did with all of your partners. And one of the things, Zach, that I share, you know, we were talking about cortisol and anxiety and all of that. And one of the exercises I do a lot with my clients is I talk about how curiosity is the antidote to anxiety because the words are the same. I don't know what's going to happen, right? But if I say I don't know what's going to happen or I don't know what's going to happen, right? Oh, then look at that.
Wow,
Wow.
that was awesome.
Wow. I just exploded with my I don't know what's going to happen. Right? My mind
Nice.
blew. Right. But if we're in the embodied, like, I'm afraid, I don't know, you know, all of that. But the words are just, it's just a truth, right? I don't know. I'm on
Mm-hmm.
this new medication. I don't know what's going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
if we neutralize the words, that's a step in and of itself. But then,
Yeah.
especially with ourself and a partner, if we switch it to just I don't know what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. Let's see. Let's play. You know,
Yeah.
you bring your Legos, I'll bring my Legos, and let's see what we create. Not
Right.
here's the Lego box and we have to do it this way. right? But that when we
Yeah.
have curiosity, then we have dopamine, then we have serotonin, then we have oxytocin, then and all of that is going to make the body more receptive. So I
Mhm.
love what you're saying about just how, not only how important, but I want to really, for all of you, people who are here with us on, relaxed phallus, flaccid phallus, dangling dick, soft cock appreciation week,
Yeah. Your unloaded
joyful
penis week.
Johnsons,
Yeah.
um, that, being able to bring it up and talk about what's actually happening in our body before doing an activity that is incredibly physical
Mhm.
is super, super hot, right? Everybody listen
Mhm.
to what Zach said. It's super hot to talk about this is what's going on. And as a result, let's get creative. I mean, that's what happened for me with my
Yeah.
partner, not knowing that it was diabetes, right? It became, well, if we have a 2-hour play date, we have a 2-hour play date. So if out of that 2 hours, 20 minutes of it, 15 minutes of it is penetrative, that doesn't mean the rest of it isn't like hot, juicy outer course. Find the things that turn you on. For us, it was camera play. That was where it was just
Mm.
like, get the toys, get the camera, let's do
Yeah.
find the things that turn you on and go
Yeah.
for it and have that be part of the play date.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even like for a kinky play date, one of the fun things to do is just show and tell. You bring your toy bag, I'll bring mine. Let's just talk
Yeah.
about it. But the other thing is too, again, looking at it from a toxically masculine sort of point of view, real quick, this sort of sense of there's something going on with me sexually and I'm afraid of talking about it, that's inherent toxic masculinity. What better way to overcome that than just being willing to be vulnerable with your partner about what's going on with you sexually? Because inherently, you have to keep in mind your sexuality involves them. It has to, right? Secondly, we already know that you're male. We already know that you're masculine. If something is going on, it's okay to be vulnerable. Again, vulnerability is hot. If you don't believe me, ask your partner.
Yeah.
There's something about, like you said, I don't know. Hey, listen, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I'm not sure, which means I'm not in control of the situation. It
Right.
doesn't mean you're weak. It just means your body has got something else going on. Part of hyper masculinity is the sense that I have to always exude power, but if you're Brene Brown, the way human beings connect is through shared vulnerability. I say this is an opportunity to be vulnerable with your partner and say, hey, look, love, I know we both enjoy the PIV. Yes, nothing makes me happier than railing you until my sciatica kicks up. However, I'm not in control of that right now. I can't promise I'll be able to do that for whatever reason. This is going on, that's going on. Is there something else? Can we talk about something else? Can we just find another way to be together, to be connective, to be vulnerable, to be in proximity physically, that is not that, because I can't promise that that's there. Honestly, I'm not in control of that anymore. Again, you open that up for the conversation. And how hot is that?
Yeah.
It can be just as connective to just lay there on someone's sofa with their head in your lap and have the conversation.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's got to be that willingness to let go of your hypermasculinity. You can still be masculine with a soft penis.
Yes.
You don't lose your testosterone because it isn't raging and looking for someplace to go.
Right.
That's the other thing. And I think we mentioned it in a previous, SCW, is the realization that penises spend most of their existence not erect.
Right. Tucked away.
So,
Not
yeah, it's
right.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah, it's okay.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the other thing that I'll say in connection with that is that, you know, a lot of women, a lot of people with vulvas, um, don't enjoy penetration and have, pelvic pain. There's, physical issues, physiological issues, this idea. Like, that's one of the things when I'm working with my clients that I just find it so hard in this toxic masculinity mindset to get past, is like when I say, you don't have to have penetrative sex to pleasure a woman. And they're like, no, that's like, I don't believe that. I do not believe it. I do not believe it. I do not believe it. I'm like, just look at the percentages. Like, there's a very high percentage of women who really don't, like, they just can't. They don't enjoy it, or they've had
Yeah.
trauma. I mean, so many different things. And once we expand the buffet to all of the things, I really love in the world of intimacy choreography, they really hone in on sex is intercourse plus outer course. So we break out of the foreplay, then sex, but
Mm-hmm.
sex and is all the stuff that's outer course, and
Mm-hmm.
then all the stuff that's intercourse. And
Mm-hmm.
you can have a great sexual experience just with an outer course buffet,
Yeah.
with and that is really fulfilling and delicious. But by having the conversation, by being open to the vulnerability, it also allows a partner, a male partner, a female partner, queer partner, any, to be any bodied partner, to be able to say, oh, actually, this is what I like too, or this is how I'm feeling. This is what I prefer. I do like a little touch on my ass. I do want my nipple sucked. I do really like that
Mm-hmm.
spot behind my neck. That does it for me even more. Like, oh, let's take a pause. You've actually, I've been tolerating something
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't feel good because I think that that's what you want, because we haven't had this conversation. So that's the hotness. So fabulous. I'm really grateful that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Okay, we should wrap this up. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, my new friend.
Let's do it sometime.
Yes,
Let's just
absolutely.
block
So
off some hours and just have a chat.
let me ask you this is, what is something that has surprised you as supremely pleasurable when you weren't penetrating?
Ah, just one thing, because there's
No,
been a couple.
you can
Okay.
as many as you want.
Um. Okay. Sure.
Mhm.
So it has surprised me. I'm not surprised by it now, but
No, but in the beginning.
a long time ago, yeah, in the beginning, I was very surprised that my nipples were sensitive as they are.
Ah, yeah.
Um, very much so. Spoiler alert: I learned that they were very sensitive before, and now that I have since had both of them pierced, they are even
Oh.
more so.
Hmm.
So I was very, very surprised about that. Just for me. What else for me is very, very. Uh, I find like caresses, touches, being touched on my arm, my partner touching my leg for some reason. Legs and thighs are very, very,
Mm.
very, very erotic for me and always have been. So that's either them touching mine or me touching theirs. And then the other thing, when I first read this question, that occurred to me that is kind of surprising when I'm not penetrating, that I find that is very pleasurable, is myself being penetrated,
Yeah.
either by a finger or something else. That was unexpected. That was kind of a, okay.
Hmm.
And again, I had to face my own toxic masculinity, because there's the holy crap, what does this mean? And it's like, you idiot, it means it feels good. Why are you overthinking this? And I think we sometimes do that. What does this pleasure mean? Well, nothing. Who knows about it? Me and the person that did it. Okay, great. So what's the next step? Is there a next step? Do we explore this? Do we freak out about it and let toxic masculinity, come over us? Or do we be the hedonistic megasexual slut that we are and further explore this avenue towards an additional form of pleasure? You mentioned a buffet. Why limit the buffet?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of something that kind of, for me, was very much a surprise. In fact, quite literally, because it sort of happened without me knowing that it was going to happen.
Mm.
So that's a conversation for another time. But it was both a consent violation, but also something I realized was very, very pleasurable. So I had to have two conversations: one with that person, but additionally with myself. Okay, what does this mean? All right.
Yeah.
Which is, and by the way, both of those conversations will really make you get over your toxic masculine ideas very, very quickly.
Hmm.
I mean, extremely so.
Hmm.
It almost have to. Um, so yeah, so those are. I'm probably sure there's more. Like I said, I've
Yeah.
forever discovering experiences, but those are two.
Beautiful.
My ears was another thing. Something about
Mm.
touching my ears, or my ears being kissed. Put your tongue in my ears. I'm done. That's it. I surrender. I quit. You win. Yeah, I'm out. That's a thing. So
Ooh,
yeah,
I
so
love that.
those,
I
yeah.
love it.
So
That's
let me
great.
stop before I give away all my
I
damn
know
secrets.
before I know
But
everybody has their secrets now. Yeah.
some
Yeah.
of them, not all,
Not all of them. Yeah.
some of them, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. And I will say, because you and I are talking, and I want to end on I wanted to end on a positive note, but I wouldn't be I would be doing a disservice, because I actually had thought about this earlier when we were talking and I didn't say it, but I do feel like it's really important in the work that we're doing with this to highlight that part of this conversation about toxic masculinity that we've been having is, prostate cancer, especially, kills Black men at double the rate that it kills white men.
Mm-hmm.
And, this everything that we've been talking about, and then, especially what you were saying about about a little bit of anal pleasure, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I have lots of friends and lots of clients where, when I start saying, like, now, you're in your 40s, and as a Black man, you need to start getting your PSA checked, and we need to be, you got to pay attention to your prostate health. This is serious business.
Yeah.
They're going to put their finger in my ass. There's no fucking way I'm going to the doctor. I mean, it's already hard enough to get men in general to the doctor, harder to get Black men to the doctor, but
Oh man.
getting them over for luckily, I mean, we're starting to not do the digital rectal exam as much, but I always like to, encourage people, especially partners who are listening, that if you love a man, and especially if you love a Black man, and you can create a space where, in the joy of sexual connection, we can start to de-armor all of the shit, around, there are all these delicious nerve endings in the ass.
Right.
That
Yeah.
can signal. Not only that, but I just recently learned that, going into the anal canal actually is one of the fastest ways to engage the vagus nerve and downregulate the body. So once you get past
Mm.
the, oh, there's something up my ass, right? Then the next phase, if you can get
Yeah.
past that, is actually like, oh, wow, like,
Yeah.
this feels really, really
Right.
good. So maybe
Yeah.
that's where we'll end, is like, take it in
Yeah.
put
No, I
something
mean,
in your ass and see if you can stimulate your vagus nerve.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with that, because you're right. Black men, the Black community in general, has a very, very complex relationship with medicine, and let's call it modern westernized medicine. And I agree,
Mhm.
um, for very, very good reason. Right. That
Yes.
being said, and I've been in groups of Black men who are like, yeah, I know I should, but I just
Mm-hmm.
or eh, dude, it doesn't. At one point, I think I actually said to somebody, when it comes to toxic masculinity, it's like, if you think that says something about your masculinity, if you ever let your doctor, somebody you pay, put a finger in your ass, imagine how masculine you will feel when you have prostate cancer.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it's, and I don't
Right.
like to do like that, but sometimes you have to make that point to
Yeah.
somebody. It's like, listen, until you've seen that, you're worried about an indignity,
Mm-hmm.
if it even is that lasts literally for a second, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not very long. It's just a quick check, or yeah, or have your doctor check your PSA.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, as a Black male, I actually started getting all of mine, as far as hypertension, all that stuff, checked early, partly because my father died at age 60,
Mm-hmm.
when I was about 30 years old. And so I do my annual every year, and those are the things I check on. I mean, so
Yeah.
you need to get over yourself, and partly because I need to have a healthy prostate. I want to have a healthy body function. I've got multiple partners. I'd like to continue having a healthy sex life with all of them for a very, very long time. This makes sense to me,
Yeah.
right? So yeah. So
Good.
yeah, I definitely agree that we need to be able to have those conversations. And dude, if you're scared, go. Let your
Mm-hmm.
partner look at you and tell you you're still hot because you did this, because you care about them. That's fine.
Yeah.
Again, it's another way to connect. And so yeah.
Exactly. Beautiful. Zach, you teach classes, you offer things. I know right now you're busy with, pursuing your
Yeah.
career in other ways, but how do people connect with you if they want to learn more about what it is that you're bringing to the world?
Let me see. So there's my socials. I'm on Twitter, because I refuse to call it X. It's at black_sex geek. There is, you can hit me up on Instagram. I mostly just point pictures of me going to the gym there. Speaking of health, that's my accountability. I go to the gym, I take a selfie, not because I like pictures of myself, but because I'm trying to remind myself to be accountable, because I will not do it and people be like, where are you? So ironically, I recently just saw a 1 year ago picture of me in the gym versus this year picture, and could definitely see the difference. So I do that. So
So
my
what's your
email
IG?
address
Yeah,
there
what's your IG handle?
is my IG is at Z Invictus, so it's the letter Z and then INV as in Victor, ICTUZ. And then my work, if you just look up the practice I work at, it's called Tanglewood. Here in Houston, it's tanglewoodbehavioral.com. So it's
Great.
Tangle is the word Tanglewood, all one word, behavioral.com. And you'll see me there. There's pictures of me there.
Great.
So,
Great.
yeah.
And the consent work and those workshops, is that people find that under the Tanglewood, or how would they find out about that when you teach again?
That right now is not available there. Although Tanglewood we are currently in the process of putting that online.
Okay.
So the best way to access that is just to hit me up,
Okay.
either through Twitter or IG.
Okay.
And I'll be able to get that out to you.
Good.
When I get that updated, I will definitely share.
Good. And we'll put all those things, in the transcript. We'll have it, all available to people, because, Zach, you really have just, you've broken through a lot of the barriers that a lot of people are struggling, to get to the other side. And, part of what we're doing this week, which I'm so grateful for, for you showing up and other men showing up and people showing up, is just to lend a hand, right? To help people go from, I'm here and I believe that I can see that on the other side, there's another way that I can have more acceptance and more pleasure. And you've just really created a beautiful bridge with a lot of really great information and care and compassion and joy and humor and sexuality, and spiciness, to help build that bridge to help people get over. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us. And we'll be having more.
Fantastic. Thank you.